I knew her secret. She thought she could take him, but I hold all the cards.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Please subscribe, like, and share. Your support helps. Now, let's get into the story.
I was reaching for my wine glass when Kayla Winters stood up from her seat across the table, smoothed the front of her expensive dress, and said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "This dinner is for people worth $20 million. I think you should leave." I set my glass down slowly, feeling the specific, disorienting heat of 40 pairs of eyes turning toward me at once. I want to be honest that I didn't fully understand, in that first frozen second, exactly why my husband's coworker was standing up in the middle of an elite investor's dinner ordering me to leave a table I'd been personally invited to. I understood it a half-second later, watching her glance toward my husband, Andre, with an expression I recognized instantly, once I finally let myself see it clearly. The specific, possessive smirk of a woman who believed she'd already won something I hadn't even realized was being contested. I smiled. I want you to understand before I tell you anything else about that night, exactly why I smiled in that moment, standing in a $2,000 dress at a table full of strangers who suddenly couldn't decide where to look. It wasn't composure, exactly, though I understand it must have looked that way. It was something closer to clarity, the specific cold clarity of finally understanding exactly what had been happening underneath my own marriage for months, delivered to me, publicly, by the one person arrogant enough to actually say it out loud. My name is Simone Baxter, and I'd been married to Andre for 11 years by the time Kayla Winters stood up at that dinner table and tried to have me removed from a room she believed belonged entirely to her. Before I tell you exactly what happened in the next 90 seconds, because what my husband did next is the single most complicated, contradictory thing I have ever watched a man do in my entire life. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because I promise you, this story does not end where you think it does. Andre hadn't said a single word yet. He sat there frozen, his jaw tight in a way I recognized from 11 years of marriage as genuine shock rather than complicity. Kayla, mistaking his silence for agreement, pressed further. "Andre," she said, Tell her this dinner isn't for people like her." I watched my husband's face shift then, something hardening behind his eyes that I hadn't seen directed at anyone in years. He stood up slowly, buttoned his jacket, and reached into his inside pocket for something I couldn't yet see. I had no idea, watching him pull that card out in front of the entire room, exactly how completely the next 60 seconds were about to change everything. Not just for Kayla, standing there with her smirk still frozen halfway on her face, but for my own marriage, which I'd already quietly decided, sitting at that table, was almost certainly over. I want to take you back further, because understanding exactly what Andre pulled out of that jacket pocket requires understanding a story I hadn't fully told even to myself until that exact night. Andre and I met in business school, both of us 24, both of us hungry in the specific way people are before life has taught them the actual cost of ambition. He came from considerably less money than most of our classmates, working 2 jobs alongside his coursework, determined to build something that would outlast the specific financial precarity he'd grown up inside. I want to be honest about the early years of our marriage, because I think it matters to understanding how thoroughly I trusted him by the time Kayla Winters entered our lives. We built Baxter Ventures together, quite literally, a private equity and logistics investment firm we co-founded 8 years into our marriage. Andre handling the client-facing deal-making, his natural charisma suited perfectly, me managing the firm's actual operational backbone from a role considerably less visible, but no less essential. I want you to understand something specific about our company's structure, because it matters enormously to what happened at that dinner table. Baxter Ventures was never simply Andre's company. Despite how often industry colleagues assumed that, given his public-facing role, I held 45% ownership. Andre held 40%. The remaining 15% belonged to a silent investor who'd backed us in our earliest, most precarious years. I mention this now because Kayla Winters, for all her confidence that night, had no idea she was standing in a room hosted by a company she believed belonged solely to the man she was sleeping with. A company that on paper, I held a larger stake in than he did. Kayla joined Baxter Hale Ventures as a senior associate roughly 2 years before that dinner. Hired directly by Andre after an impressive interview process I'd been peripherally involved in myself, given my role overseeing hiring for the firm's investment team. I remember meeting her during her final interview round, finding her sharp, articulate, exactly the kind of ambitious young talent our firm actively sought out. I want to be honest that I never once suspected anything beyond professional respect between them during that first year. Andre mentioned her occasionally, the way you'd mention any promising junior colleague, praising a deal she'd helped structure, noting her rapid growth within the firm. I had no reason during that first year to read anything more into those mentions. Looking back now, I can trace the specific season things began shifting, roughly 14 months before that dinner. Andre's travel schedule intensified considerably, coinciding almost exactly with Kayla's own promotion into a role that required significant travel alongside him for client meetings across 3 regional offices. I noticed, during that period, a specific new energy in how Andre discussed work, more animated, more engaged in a way that felt, at the time, like simple professional excitement rather than anything I needed to examine more closely. I understand now, with painful hindsight, exactly what that energy actually represented. I want to walk you through the specific erosion of intimacy in our marriage during that final year, because I think it matters to understanding exactly how much clarity that dinner table moment actually gave me, despite how devastating it initially felt. Andre grew increasingly distracted during our time together, his phone rarely leaving arm's reach even during dinners we'd once protected carefully as uninterrupted time. Physical affection between us grew sparse, replaced by a kind of practiced, distant cordiality that I told myself, repeatedly, was simply the natural texture of 11 years of marriage rather than something considerably more concerning. I confronted him once, roughly 6 months before that dinner, asking directly whether something had shifted in how he felt about our marriage. "I'm just under a lot of pressure at work," he said, an explanation I accepted, largely because I desperately wanted it to be true. The dinner that night was an annual investors gathering our firm co-hosted with a partner institution, an event I'd attended personally for 6 consecutive years, given my own significant ownership stake in the company hosting it. I received my invitation directly, the same way I always did, through the event coordinator rather than through Andre. A detail that would matter enormously to understanding exactly how baffled I was by Kayla's confidence that night, given that I had every legitimate right to be sitting exactly where I was. I had no idea, getting dressed for that dinner, exactly how much Andre's affair with Kayla had already progressed behind the scenes, or exactly how confident she'd become in her own assumed position within both his professional and personal life. Confident enough, apparently, to believe she had the standing to order his own wife out of a room I'd helped build from nothing. I want to walk you through what I eventually learned about Kayla's specific reasoning that night, pieced together over the following weeks through a combination of Andre's own account and later, a considerably more revealing conversation with Kayla herself. Kayla had spent the previous 14 months, by her own later admission, quietly convincing herself that Andre's marriage was already effectively over in every way that mattered. Andre had apparently told her, at various points during their affair, that things between us had grown distant, that our marriage had become more of a business partnership than a real relationship. The kind of comfortable, self-serving narrative people constructing an affair often tell themselves and each other to make the betrayal feel less like betrayal. I want to be honest that I don't believe Andre ever explicitly told Kayla our marriage was ending. I believe, based on everything I eventually pieced together, that Kayla heard exactly what she wanted to hear in his vague, guilty descriptions of marital distance, constructing an entire narrative in which my removal from that dinner would simply be accelerating an inevitability, rather than actually disrupting anything real. I learned, weeks later, that Kayla had specifically requested placement at our table for that dinner, using her role helping coordinate the event's logistics to ensure she'd be seated close enough to engineer exactly the confrontation she'd apparently been planning for weeks. She told a colleague beforehand, in a conversation that colleague later relayed to me directly, that she intended to finally force things into the open that night, believing, with a confidence I still find remarkable in hindsight, that Andre would simply stand beside her once the confrontation actually happened. I want you to notice the specific arrogance embedded in that plan, because it mattered enormously to how catastrophically it eventually backfired. Kayla had constructed an entire scenario in her mind where humiliating me publicly would somehow read as decisive and confident, rather than as the desperate, presumptuous overreach it actually was. I want to walk you through the specific tension of that evening as I experienced it in real time, without yet understanding its full context. I noticed Kayla watching me with unusual intensity throughout the cocktail hour preceding dinner, a specific, assessing quality to her attention that felt different from the professional courtesy I'd grown accustomed to from her over 2 years. I mentioned it to Andre, quietly as we took our seats. Kayla seems tense tonight, I said. Is everything all right with her? I watched something flicker across his face, a specific, guilty discomfort I registered, but didn't yet fully understand. She's just stressed about a deal she's been working, he said, an explanation I accepted, having no reason yet to suspect it was anything else. Dinner proceeded normally through the appetizer course, conversation flowing easily around our table of 8, mostly firm executives and their spouses alongside 2 visiting investors from our partner institution. I noticed Kayla growing increasingly quiet as the meal progressed, her earlier assessing attention curdling into something more pointed, more deliberate. She waited, I understand now, for a specific lull in conversation. The natural quiet that settles over a table between courses, when attention scatters briefly before the next dish arrives. That was the moment she chose, standing up from her seat with the deliberate theatricality of someone who'd rehearsed this exact scene many times in her own head. I had no idea, reaching for my wine glass in that quiet lull, exactly how carefully orchestrated the next several seconds actually were, or exactly how badly Kayla had misjudged both my own standing in that room, and considerably more importantly, the specific limits of how far Andre would actually let this go. The 6 weeks before the wedding were quiet, too quiet looking back. My mother stopped calling as often. When she did call, the conversations felt scripted, polite, clipped, like she was speaking to a vendor rather than her daughter. I told myself she was just busy. Weddings do that to people. My stepbrother sent one text during that whole stretch. Not a thank you, just a link to the registry with the message, in case you wanted to also get us something for the big day, LOL. I stared at that message for a long time. $95,000, and he was asking if I wanted to also get a gift. I didn't respond. 3 days before the wedding, I got a call from my younger sister, the one person in the family I still trusted without complication. She sounded strange. Careful. Hey, she said. Have you seen the family group chat? I hadn't. I wasn't in it. I got removed a few weeks ago, I said. Mom said it was because I kept stressing everyone out asking about budget stuff. There was a long pause. You should probably know what's in there. She sent me screenshots. My hands were shaking by the third one. There was a message from my mother, dated almost a month earlier. She only gave $95K, not the full $120 we asked. After everything we've done for her, this is what we get. I'm not going to pretend I'm not disappointed in front of the in-laws. A reply from my stepbrother. Honestly kind of embarrassing when Fonsette's family is asking why our side seems tight on money, LOL. Maybe just don't make a big deal about her being there. Don't need the awkwardness. And then the message that made my stomach drop entirely, from my mother 2 days before the wedding. Agreed. Let's keep her at arm's length day of. I'll handle the guest list with security so there's no scene. I read that message maybe 15 times. Not because I didn't understand it, because I was waiting for it to stop being true. My own mother had gone to security, not to protect the wedding from a stranger, to protect it from me, the person who had wired $95,000 into that wedding's existence. My sister was crying on the phone by the time I finished reading. I didn't know how to tell you, she said. I've been sick about it for days. I told her not to apologize. None of this was hers to carry. I had a choice in that moment. Stay home, protect myself, let them have their perfect day without me in it. Some part of me, the tired part, the part that had spent 5 years giving and giving, wanted exactly that. But another part of me, the part that built 2 flower shops out of a folding table and a pandemic, wasn't ready to disappear quietly. Not after everything. I decided I would show up. Not to cause a scene. Just to see with my own eyes whether they would actually go through with it. The morning of the wedding, I got dressed in the dress I'd bought for this exact day. I did my own hair because I didn't trust my hands not to shake if someone else did it. I drove out to that magazine spread venue 2 hours outside the city, the same one I had helped pay for, and I told myself, whatever happens, you'll handle it with grace. You already know what happened next. You saw it in the opening moments of this video. The guard, the list, the word forbidden in red letters, my mother's mouth forming the words keep her out through the glass. But here's what you didn't see yet. After that text came through, the one calling me a tramp, in front of everyone arriving behind me, I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that because I think we're conditioned to expect the woman in this story to break down on the steps. I didn't. Something in me went very, very still instead. I stepped back from the door. I called my sister, who was already inside, and asked her one question. Is his parents' side already seated? Yes, she whispered. Why? Because I think it's time they learned exactly how this wedding got paid for. Andre and I sat alone at that table for nearly an hour after the room emptied, the specific, exhausting work of finally having the conversation we'd both been avoiding for months finally beginning in earnest. How long? I asked him, and I want to be honest that my voice shook slightly, despite the composure I'd managed to maintain throughout the confrontation itself. 14 months, he said quietly. I'm not going to insult you by pretending it was shorter than it actually was. I want to walk you through the specific questions I asked him during that hour, because I think the honesty of that conversation mattered considerably more to our eventual outcome than the dramatic reveal at the dinner table itself. I asked him why. I asked him whether he'd ever actually intended to leave our marriage. I asked him what, specifically, had made him choose that exact moment to end things with Kayla rather than simply letting the affair continue quietly, the way it apparently had for over a year. Watching her stand up and try to have you removed, he said, made me see exactly what I'd let this become. I'd been telling myself a story where none of this really affected you, where I could keep both things going without anyone actually getting hurt. Watching her humiliate you publicly because of choices I made privately, I couldn't keep pretending after that. I want to be honest about my own complicated feelings sitting across from him that night, because I think oversimplifying them would do a disservice to anyone listening who's ever faced something similar. Part of me felt genuine gratitude for his defense of me at that table. A real, instinctive choice to protect me publicly, even at the cost of exposing his own affair in the most humiliating way possible for himself. But I want to be equally honest that gratitude for one moment of defense doesn't erase 14 months of betrayal, or the specific loneliness I'd felt during that final year of our marriage, sensing something was wrong without having language for exactly what. I need you to understand something, I told him. Standing up for me tonight doesn't undo 14 months. I'm not deciding anything about our marriage based on one dramatic moment at a dinner table. If we're going to actually rebuild something real, it's going to require considerably more than a single good decision made under pressure. I want to walk you through his response, because it mattered enormously to whether I believed any of this was actually salvageable. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight. I'm asking for the chance to actually earn it, slowly, in whatever way that looks like for you. I understand if that's not something you're willing to offer. I want to address the professional fallout as well, because it mattered considerably to how the following weeks unfolded. Kayla resigned from Baxter Hale Ventures 3 days after that dinner, before we'd even had the opportunity to formally address her position with HR. I understand, through mutual colleagues, that she took a position at a competing firm across the city, a career move I neither celebrated nor felt any particular need to interfere with. I had no idea, sitting with Andre in that empty dining room, exactly how much slower and more difficult the actual work of rebuilding trust would be compared to the single dramatic moment that had exposed everything. Nor did I know whether I'd ultimately decide the marriage was worth that considerable effort at all. It's been 10 months now since that dinner, and I want to give you an honest account of where things actually stand, rather than a tidier resolution than real reconciliation usually offers. Andre and I began couples therapy the week following that dinner, a decision I insisted on before agreeing to any version of continuing our marriage. I want to be honest that those early sessions were considerably more painful than the dinner confrontation itself. Working through 14 months of specific betrayals, small lies, and moments of dishonesty I hadn't even known to be suspicious of at the time. I made a deliberate choice during those early months to maintain considerable independence within our marriage rather than rushing back into the full intimacy we'd once shared. I want to be honest that this wasn't punishment, exactly, though I understand it may have felt that way to Andre at times. It was simply honest pacing, refusing to pretend healing moved faster than it actually did. Our professional partnership at Baxter Hale Ventures required its own kind of careful renegotiation. Given that Andre's affair had involved a direct employee of our firm, I want to be honest that this added a layer of professional complexity to our personal reconciliation that most couples navigating infidelity don't have to manage simultaneously. We implemented, with our board's full knowledge, new formal policies around workplace relationships specifically because of what had happened, a decision I insisted on regardless of what we ultimately decided about our marriage. I've thought often, over these past 10 months, about the specific complexity of that dinner table moment. A man defending me from public humiliation while simultaneously having caused the underlying betrayal that made the humiliation possible in the first place. I don't think that moment redeemed him, exactly. I think it revealed something true about him that had been buried under 14 months of cowardice. That he was still, underneath everything, capable of choosing me when it actually mattered, even at real cost to himself. I want to be careful here, because I don't want anyone listening to hear this as a simple, uncomplicated endorsement of staying after betrayal. I stayed because Andre did the difficult, sustained work of actually earning trust back, slowly over months, not because of one dramatic moment of public defense. Plenty of people offer a single grand gesture, and then return to exactly the patterns that caused the original harm. I watched Andre closely for months before I let myself believe his change was genuine rather than performed. If you've ever been humiliated publicly by someone who assumed they understood your worth better than you did, or discovered a betrayal in the worst possible circumstances, I want you to hear this clearly. Someone else's arrogant assumption about your standing rarely reflects the actual truth of it. Kayla assumed she understood exactly who belonged in that room and who didn't, without ever once verifying whether her assumption was actually correct. And sometimes the people who fail you in one enormous way are still capable of a genuine, difficult reckoning. Not because a single defense erases real harm, but because real change sometimes begins in the exact moment someone finally sees clearly what their choices have actually cost the people they love. Kayla Winters stood up at that dinner table certain. She understood exactly who deserved to be in that room. She had no idea, ordering me to leave, that she was about to learn precisely how wrong she was, not just about the company, but about everything else she'd convinced herself was true.